Hello everyone, my name is Tom and I am a follower of Jesus from Finland. Today I would like to elaborate on my previous video. In my previous video I talked about why believers, why followers of Jesus need to understand that Russia wages an information war. And this video is not an audio-only video. I have a map here and I will use it at least partly during this video. First of all, I would like to explain briefly why I do these videos. First of all, I think it is crucial that believers not only study the Bible, but also get an understanding of how our world functions. Studying the Bible is, of course, not unimportant. It's very important to study the Bible, but it's also important to know how the world functions. And I think that we as believers need to be a light in this world. And if we don't get this war going on, that the war that is going on in Ukraine, if we don't get a correct understanding of it, there are no guarantees that we are going to understand other wars and conflicts. So this is the reason why I make these videos. So to understand what is going on in Ukraine, we have to understand this region, Eastern Europe. And we have to understand that this region is in the middle of two different worlds, one could say. We have Western democracy here and dictatorship here. And I would argue that this region is one of the most misunderstood regions in the world. And the fact is that many people talk about things going on in this region, but they lack an understanding of the history and the region. So this is very important. And of course, depending on how much knowledge you have about this region, it could take quite much time and effort to learn the basic things. Russia, it's very important to have knowledge about Russia, but to understand Russia, we have first to talk about dictatorships. The first thing to understand about the dictatorships is that dictatorships have their own playbook. They don't have the same playbook as Western democracies. Dictatorships, there is no, of course, no democracy in dictatorships. And therefore, there is no democracy in Russia. There are no critical newspapers or TV channels. They have all been shut down. People who are criticizing the government, they are murdered brutally or put in prison. That's a fact. Much could be said about Russia. So dictatorships, they have a completely other playbook compared to Western democracies. We have to understand that this is very important. And dictatorships have no interest in telling the truth. They are using information as a tool to fool the Western world. And the fact is that Russia has been very good in its information war against the West. Very good. They have been very successful in it. They have reached far with their false, fabricated narrative. RT, former Russia Today, is the major tool for Moscow, the regime there, to spread the false narrative. And many in the Western world take what RT is saying as facts. Critical thinking, much suspicion, much doubt have to be in place when you listen to RT. It's not a correct source of information. One has to relate very critically to it. And RT is not the only channel that spreads Russian disinformation. There are many, many other platforms. And also Westerners who spread the false narrative of Russia. And this region is the epicenter of the battle between Russia as a dictatorship and the Western world. And the fact is that Russia wants to have a grip, more or less, on this region. And actually, from the Russian perspective, these borders are not borders in their eyes. They see this region only as their buffer zone. Russia has its own country here, and this region is only the buffer zone of Russia. Russia doesn't respect its neighbors. They don't care. They want to influence, control, impact, and interfere in its neighboring countries. And military acts are not ruled out at all. And the military of Russia is not there primarily to defend Russia, but to be used against its neighbors if the Russian regime decides to do it. So this is about Russia. And it is therefore, because of the history, Finland, my own country, was attacked by Russia, or then Soviet Union, in 1939. And we were lucky to keep our independence. But in the same turmoil, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were occupied by the Soviet Union. And also many other countries here. So, based on the history, the peoples living here are very suspicious toward Russia, because we know that we can't trust in Russia. Russia has no interest in living in peace and harmony with us here. And therefore, it is no coincidence at all that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania joined NATO and the European Union as quickly as possible after that they regained their independence. The Russian narrative is that NATO expands. Of course, Russia doesn't like NATO, but NATO is not anything other than a defense alliance. NATO doesn't attack other countries and territories arbitrarily. NATO is a defense alliance. And there is a false perception among some circles in the Western world that NATO is more or less bad and it expands toward the east. But this in Eastern Europe, the most this is a very this is not a common way to see it. We don't see NATO as something bad. So this is very important to understand that Russia, in its information war, of course, Russia wants to portray NATO as something bad. And then there are Westerners who pick up this narrative and spread it. Some do it on purpose, some without knowing what they are doing. But in doing it, they practically they side with Russia. And they cause a lot of confusion. Ukraine took a significant step toward Western democracy in 2014 by ousting the Russian-friendly president. Because, as I explained, Russia wants to hold this region in its grip. And they have tried to do it with Ukraine. There was a Russian-friendly president, and Russia has also tried to impact Ukraine with Russian-friendly media. But the Ukrainian people, and here this is crucial, Moscow, the regime in Moscow, wants to blame the United States for things going on here. And it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The Russian narrative is that CIA operates here. And they portray the United States, NATO, and CIA as evil actors. And of course, from the Russian perspective, the United States, NATO, and CIA are bad and evil because the primary enemy of Russia is the United States. But it's not about United States. And actually, it's not about NATO either. It's about this region and the will of the people living here. Belarus is also a dictatorship. And they are in the grip of Russia. But Ukraine, the Baltic states, and Finland, we want to belong to the Western world. But Russia doesn't want it. Of course, it doesn't want it. So it's the will of the people to belong to the Western world. It was the will of the Ukrainian people to oust this Russian-friendly president. There were no operations by CIA. This is a lie spread by Moscow. And people believing that NATO is expanding and CIA operating here, USA operating here, the Western world operating here, they are if we put it blatantly, they are playing by the Russian playbook. And I have to say, I have been shocked to see how confused people are when they talk about this region. So there is so much confusion, so much lies. And people who talk about this region, they don't have a clue what they are talking about. It's a battle between democracy and dictatorship. That's how it is. And this is the reason why Russia did start the war against Ukraine. In 2014, by the way. The war didn't start in February this year. It started in 2014. Because Russia didn't manage to get a grip of Ukraine. The Ukrainian people ousted the Russian-friendly president. And of course Russia didn't like it. They got upset. But Russia is not a normal country. Of course, Russia should learn to respect its neighbors. But it's not going. As long as Putin and his friends have the power in Russia, this is going to go on. And the Western world needs to understand it. So, Russia couldn't get a grip of Ukraine. So they decided to act militarily instead. How about the Nazis in Ukraine? There are Nazis in almost every Western country. Also in Ukraine. But this is a lie spread by Russia, and it has been picked up by Westerners that there would be a lot of Nazis in Ukraine. It's not true. Check the links in the description field of this video. It's a lie. Moscow has portrayed on purpose Ukraine as an evil, bad country to justify the war. And many in the Western world spreads this narrative. Too many. So Russia has reached far with this false narrative. Very far. And they have been successful in it. Very successful. Russia has committed severe war crimes in Ukraine. Russia has been bombing civilians, residential buildings, schools, and hospitals. They have been bombing key infrastructure. 40% of the power plants and the power system in Ukraine is either destroyed or damaged. Meanwhile, many Westerners talk about the Nazis. But these Westerners seem to don't care about the war crimes committed by Russia. Russia has, as I said, bombed civilians. They are raping, and they have massacred civilians. So there is a war going on, a battle. And the problem is that there are other bad and evil players in our world who that likely are learning from Russia. Then there is this thing that the Western world provoked. It is the same problem that as these other lies, that the Western world provoked Moscow. No. The fact is that Moscow doesn't respect its neighbors. No one in this region wants to threaten or provoke Russia. So there are so many lies. And this was a short, brief attempt to explain these things. I have tried to explain them briefly with my limited English. So we as believers need to learn how the world functions. It's crucial. And we have to understand that bad and evil players in our world use information war. I have put links in the description section, so please check them. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.